My glue crew friends from TikTok created a challenge that we all participated in. This is my spread, and today I'm going to show you how I did it, step by step from the beginning to the end. Hi, I'm Christine, the artist behind our list of designs, and I'm happy you're here. Welcome. I always keep a box close by so I can throw my scraps in it when I'm working on a project. And actually, I have several boxes like that fill up. And I'm really happy that this challenge came along because I really need to clean it out and use some of these little pieces. So that's what I did. I started in my journal and just found a bunch of pieces. Most of these pieces coordinate because they're all from the same or similar projects. I try and separate my scraps sometimes by colors. So I wanted a neutral background, and this box of scraps was perfect for this. There's some of my favorite pieces in here, like the dictionary page with the crow on it. Although a lot of my favorite things got covered, and you kind of have to be prepared for that. But they're there, and I love them, and there's a lot of it that shows through. To start out a page like this, I don't really worry about where these pieces go, although I do keep in mind if I'm going to use, for instance, what I'm working with now, the lined paper with the flowers on it, that it's kind of evenly distributed across both pages. Other than that, I don't really worry about where things go because, again, a lot of it's going to get covered up. The main goal in this part of the project is just to get the entire page on both sides completely covered. And when you start working on the images that go on top of this background, if there's something in a place that you don't want it, you can always add another layer and glue another scrap on top before you put the main images, the top layer, down. I'm using matte Mod Podge here, and I usually thin it down a little bit with water to make it smooth on there easier, and it takes less time to dry, and it's a little bit thinner because these pages get quite thick. Sometimes I add 2, 3, 4 layers. And a lot of times after I get this base layer down, I'll go back and add some gesso. I like working with white gesso to kind of knock back the background a little bit so you don't see everything, but it's still peeking through. And you can tint gesso with a little bit of paint. Although in this particular project, I didn't add any gesso immediately at all, but you'll see that I add a little bit later. Okay, I did not cheat in this scraps only project. So we were supposed to only use scraps from our scrap box. And I printed these lanterns out for another project, and my printer was running out of ink, and it printed lines and didn't look good. So I ended up having to do some maintenance on my printer and reprint it for a different project. And these colors are so beautiful, I didn't want to just throw it away. So the whole page ended up in my scrap box. And I love them so much that I wanted to use them on a spread in my own personal journal to keep. And this was the perfect opportunity to do that. At this point, I had no idea what I was going to do with this page in the end. I just kind of did a go with the flow kind of thing and staggered the lanterns. And I was very happy that I had this paint still in a container from a previous project and it had not dried yet. So I went 100% all in with the scrap theory and used even paint that was left over. And you might ask, how in the world did I have the perfect paint for this? Because I use my favorite colors over and over again. So sometimes I do more blues, bluish greens, and oranges, which, I mean, you can kind of see that in here a little bit. So my palette changes a little bit, but overall, I'm drawn to the same colors over and over again. So that was a lucky find that I had still a wet palette sitting there waiting to be used up. And in another video, I'll show you what I do with leftover paint. If I'm not going to be in the art room for a while and I know that my leftover paint at the end of a project's going to be sitting for a long time, one of the things that I love to do is just open up the art journal and paint the colors on a page that can be used later, not knowing what I'm going to do with it. But sometimes that's the best thing to open it up to start a project, is when there's already something down, even if you don't know where you're going with it. And then you don't have to watch your paint go in the garbage. This is great if you're using expensive paint, which I have a mix. I have cheap paint and I have more expensive paint that I try and save for canvas paintings. But sometimes you just got to grab that color. I have a few of my favorites that are higher end paints that just look different when they go down. And so sometimes I use it in my journaling. But one of the great things about journaling is you don't have to really worry about the paint, and when you're sealing it in layers of matte Mod Podge or gel medium, it lasts a long time. It doesn't crack. I've had journals for years and I've used house paint. So if you're in Home Depot and you see those dollar sample paints, or the oops paint they call it in some of those stores, it's fine to use for journaling. Super cheap and so many colors to choose from. I would just suggest don't lay it too thick. So here I am just blending the colors around the edges to extend the squares of paper that I ripped with the lanterns on it. And I love that smoky, mysterious effect. So I decided at some point just to kind of blend them into the page and extend those little smoke trails. At this point, I'm just mixing on the page instead of mixing the paint to try and match. And you just keep layering until it's the right color and blend it in. I'm going in a little bit over the torn paper into the printed section, so it gives it a more blended look. When you first start adding this paint, for the most part, especially with the lighter colors, they're a little bit translucent, so you can still see, especially if you're applying it very thin, you can still see some of the writing in the background. But closer to the lanterns, I didn't want to see as much of the background. So I took out my gesso, and I'm just using white gesso here. I'm not going to mix any paint because I wanted that kind of lighter smoky effect around the edges. And I'm just going around what I've already blended in and into some of the sections that I've already added paint. It covers the background a little bit better, while around the edges you can still see a little bit coming through. And then I'm going to go over with more paint and blending around where I'm adding the gesso now. But really the point here is just to play and keep adding layers until you get the effect that you want. So there are sections that I went over and over and over until I got it to look the way I wanted it to. This is a great project to just turn on the music and pull out your paint and your gesso and just start playing around. And then give it a minute, because I added something else that I never would have thought of. And as I was working on this, I thought, ooh, I wonder what it would look like if I added another product. Sometimes layering products helps give you the effects that you want. And the only way you're going to know is just try. In painting on canvas, for me, that would look like putting down my basic lines with pencil or chalk, and then painting the first layer in acrylic paint, and then painting with oil on top of that. I don't use oil in my journals, but I do use oil pastels. And I can't really give any advice yet on that because I've just started playing with oil pastels. And here's a fun little story to tell you. Bob and I went thrifting last weekend, I believe, and we went into a hospice thrift store, and I was searching through the craft stuff, and I found a box of brand new oil pastels that only had a few barely used. I was so excited. I got it for $5.99. So when you're thrifting and you find the craft section, dig. It was hidden. But I found it and I'm still happy about it. So here's the other product that I was mentioning before. I decided that since now I have this layer of gesso, which gives ink a little bit, it doesn't smear and move around as much. It gives it a good surface to use blending inks. So I decided to try it. I had no idea how it was going to work out, and I'm super happy. I did notice that on the sections that didn't have gesso, you could see the swirl marks from the brush. So I did mostly that area with the gesso, and it really added a whole nother dimension. I love it. I'm definitely going to use this process again. I would actually like to recreate this page, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But you can see I sped the video up 3 times, so you can imagine how long it took me to play around with this. Although, you know, when you get into this space, listening to music and just playing around with different products and different techniques, that time goes by quickly. So I did spend a lot of time on this, but I didn't notice the time going by. Now, after I have all of this blended in and where it doesn't look like square blocks on the page, I wanted to extend those trails of smoke coming from the lanterns. And I used the Derwent graphite blocks in this white, I guess this is more like chalk. I could have used chalk. This is the first time I've tried this in a book like this, and I would love, this is what I was talking about before. I'd like to recreate this page. While it looks okay, and I went over it and over it to kind of blend it and spread out those lines and make them look smoky, I'd like to find another way to do this. I may try and thin out some gesso and paint it with a thin brush next time, but overall, it came out okay. This block, when you lay it down, it's very chalky, and you can wet your paintbrush and smooth it out. I've used the gray and the black, but not to create lines. So I don't know, I may want to redo this at another time and see if I can make those lines look better from close up. They look fine in video far away, but that's the only thing that I wasn't really, well, there's one other thing that I wasn't really happy with, but this is one of those things that I didn't love how it came out in the end, but we'll see. That's, everything can't be perfect all the time, but that's how you learn, right? So I will go back, and whether I create the same exact thing again, I will go back and use a different method for creating these smoke trails. The other thing that I wasn't 100% satisfied with was the writing. I created a poem to go with this, and because I didn't want to print out something new and wanted to stick to the whole scraps only challenge, I hand wrote the poem on the page, and I hate my handwriting. It's terrible. So I wrote it, and then I tried to fix it, and then I wrote it again, and I really wasn't happy with it. It was fine to submit to the group when I was done, but once I submitted it and we posted it and tagged everyone, I decided, since it's going to live forever in my journal, to go back and print the poem and cut it out in pieces, and I glued it over the handwriting. So this was the original, and you can see the handwriting is messy and crooked, and you can see the white that I went over the first layer. It's just a hot mess. So this was the original, and at the beginning of this video is the one that I fixed, but I will add it here at the end so you can see the difference between the first one and the one that I fixed. And here's the final version. I hope you enjoyed this video. I really appreciate everyone who continued to watch and support, and I'll see you next time.